What does a billionaire on the verge of signing a $100 million deal have in common with the waitress pouring his water? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. At least that's what Harrison Sterling thought. He was sitting in Aurelia, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, about to change the world of green energy. The contracts were open, the pen was in his hand. But he never saw her coming. He never imagined that a quiet waitress with tired eyes and a tragic past held the one secret that could either save his entire legacy or shatter it into a million hesitations. He was about to sign. Then she leaned in, and with a whisper that cut through the silence, she said 4 words that stopped his world cold. "That's the wrong formula." The air in Aurelia was thick with the scent of money. Not the crisp, vulgar smell of new bills, but the ancient, ingrained aroma of generational wealth, a subtle perfume of truffle oil, vintage leather, and effortless power. Isabella Rossi breathed it in every night. For 8 hours, she'd glide between tables, draped in starched white linen, a ghost in a black uniform, her own identity dissolving into the polished mahogany and crystal glassware. Tonight, Table 12 was the center of the restaurant's universe. It was an unofficial throne nestled in a secluded alcove with a panoramic view of the glittering Manhattan skyline. And seated at its head was the King Harrison Sterling. Bella knew the name, of course. Everyone did. Sterling, the boy genius from MIT who founded Sterling Dynamics and was now, at 38, a titan of the tech industry. His face, usually seen on the cover of Forbes or Wired, was even more intense in person. Sharp jaw eyes the color of a stormy sea, and an aura of restless energy that seemed barely contained by his bespoke Tom Ford suit. He wasn't just in the room. He owned the space it occupied. With him were 2 men in similarly expensive suits, investors Bella guessed by their cautious expressions and deferential posture. These were Mr. Davenport, a silver-haired patriarch of an old banking family, and Kenji Tanaka from a Tokyo-based venture capital fund. But Bella's attention was drawn to the 4th man, Dr. Robert Kendrick Sterling's head of R&D. He was preening his chest, puffed out, basking in the glow of his boss's success. Bella had served them their appetizers, a delicate, seared scallop dish, and was now refilling their water glasses, her movements practiced and invisible. It was a skill she had perfected to be present, but unseen, to hear everything and register nothing. The efficiency is unprecedented. Harrison Kendrick was saying, his voice a little too loud. The Sterling-Kendrick catalyst and I do appreciate the joint credit. Truly will reduce the energy cost of electrolysis by 60%. This isn't incremental. This is a paradigm shift. Green hydrogen becomes cheaper than natural gas. Harrison Sterling nodded a curt, impatient gesture. He tapped a sleek black tablet on the table. Show them the core equation, Robert. The part that matters. Kendrick, beaming, picked up a pen and smoothly uncapped it. He grabbed a thick linen napkin, a minor sacrilege in a place like Aurelia, and began to write. Bella's heart gave a strange, painful lurch. It was an echo from a life she had buried 6 years ago. A life of whiteboards, quantum mechanics, and the thrilling pursuit of discovery. A life before the betrayal, before the debt, before this black uniform became her skin. She tried to look away, to focus on the condensation of the water pitcher in her hand. It's not your world anymore, Bella. But she couldn't. Her eyes were drawn to the elegant, flowing script on the napkin. Kendrick was explaining his work with condescending simplicity. It boils down to maximizing the probability of quantum tunneling for the proton transfer. We manipulate the electron spin state of the platinum-iridium lattice. The equation governing the catalytic efficiency, I, is what secures our patent." He finished with a flourish, sliding the napkin to the center of the table. Mr. Davenport and Mr. Tanaka stared at the equation with the polite, uncomprehending reverence of men who dealt in dollars, not Daltons. Sterling, however, studied it with fierce intensity. And the quantum tunneling probability? Function psi. It's stable across all temperatures and pressures we've modeled, ironclad Kendrick said with a smug smile. That's the secret sauce. My own proprietary work. Bella froze. Her hand holding the heavy pitcher trembled almost imperceptibly. Her gaze was fixed on the last term of the equation, puisque S. She could see the full notation in her mind, the complex integral she had spent 2 years of her PhD program deriving. The world around her fell away. The clinking of cutlery, the murmur of conversation, the city lights outside the window. It all vanished. She was back in a dusty university lab smelling of ozone and old coffee. She was standing in front of a whiteboard, her hand covered in marker dust, arguing passionately with her advisor, Professor Albright. She remembered the exhilarating moment of breakthrough, the elegant simplicity of the final proof, her secret source. And it was wrong. Not just slightly off. Catastrophically wrong. She had discovered the error herself a week before she was set to defend her thesis. A subtle yet fatal miscalculation in the electron density variable Suku. When corrected, it didn't just reduce the efficiency. Under high-pressure conditions, the whole reaction became unstable. It created a volatile, explosive byproduct. She had told Albright. He had dismissed her concerns, called it pre-defense jitters. 2 weeks later, he published her original flawed research under his own name, and Kendrick's his former postdoc student. Her name was nowhere. The academic board sided with the tenured professor. Broken and buried in legal threats, she couldn't afford to fight. She dropped out, disappearing into the anonymity of the service industry. Now, 6 years later, her ghost had come back to haunt her on a rich man's napkin, and they were about to build a $100 million time bomb on top of it. Bella's breath caught in her throat. The investors were nodding. Harrison Sterling was reaching for the portfolio of contracts Mr. Davenport had slid across the table. A Mont Blanc pen appeared in his hand. The deal was seconds from being done. She could say nothing. She could let it happen. It wasn't her problem. She was just a waitress, fired for disrupting a high-profile dinner, blacklisted. Who would believe her? But she saw the headline in her mind. Sterling Dynamics plant explosion kills dozens. She saw the smug look on Kendrick's face, a man getting rich and famous off a lie that would get people killed. The old fire, the one she thought had been extinguished by years of grief and exhaustion, roared to life in her chest. Harrison Sterling uncapped the pen. The soft click echoed in the sudden silence of Bella's world. She moved before she could second-guess herself. Her feet carried her forward, silent on the plush carpet. She leaned over Sterling's shoulder, her professional waitress smile a mask of stone, as if to ask if he needed more bread. Her voice was a ghost of a whisper, meant for him alone, a tiny pinprick in the monumental silence of the deal. "Mr. Sterling," she breathed, her lips just inches from his ear. "Don't sign. That's the wrong formula." The world didn't stop, but for Harrison Sterling, it felt like it did. His universe was one of data control and calculated risks. It operated on a set of rigid, predictable principles. A waitress, an anonymous cog in the service machine of a restaurant he'd probably never visit again, did not whisper cryptographic warnings about quantum chemistry in his ear. It was a variable he couldn't compute. His hand holding the pen froze millimeters above the signature line. For a fraction of a second, his mind refused to process the words, dismissing them as an auditory hallucination. He half-turned his stormy eyes, locking onto Bella's. He saw a young woman, maybe late 20s, with dark, intelligent eyes that held a depth of seriousness utterly at odds with her role. There was no hint of a prank, no trace of madness. There was only a calm, terrifying certainty. "What did you just say?" His voice was low, a dangerous rumble beneath the surface of the conversation. The other 3 men at the table looked up their polite smiles, faltering. The spell was broken. Mr. Davenport lowered his glasses. "Is there a problem?" Harrison Bella didn't flinch under Sterling's intense scrutiny. She stood perfectly still, her professional poise unwavering, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. "My apologies, sir," she said, her voice still quiet, but clear and steady. "I misspoke." She began to retreat, the survival instinct screaming at her to flee. But Sterling wasn't letting go. He hadn't become a billionaire by ignoring anomalies. "No," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You didn't misspeak." "Say it again." Dr. Kendrick scoffed, a bubble of indignant laughter escaping his lips. "Harrison, what is this?" "The staff is interrupting." He shot Bella a look of pure venom, a glare that said, "You are fired before you even reach the kitchen." Bella's eyes flickered to Kendrick, and in them Harrison saw a flash of something he didn't expect, not fear, but contempt. It was the look of a superior, not a subordinate. She met Harrison's gaze again. The final term, she said, her voice dropping back into a whisper. "The probability function for the tunneling event, PQS. It's incorrectly defined. It doesn't account for relativistic effects on the electron shell at high energy states. It assumes a static electron density. It's not static." The room went completely silent. Mr. Davenport and Mr. Tanaka exchanged bewildered looks. They were fluent in profit margins and market caps, not quantum mechanics. Kendrick's face, which had been a mask of smug triumph, began to drain of color. He looked at Bella as if she were an apparition. That's absurd. Who are you to question my work?" "This is the most advanced research in the field. It's stolen research." Bella said the words falling from her lips before she could stop them. The dam of her restraint had broken, and the person you stole it from realized the mistake 6 years ago. Under pressure, the catalyst won't just be inefficient, it will become unstable. The entire reaction will cascade. You're not building a green energy solution, Dr. Kendrick. You're building a bomb. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and they all hit their mark. Harrison Sterling's eyes narrowed, shifting from Bella's resolute face to Kendrick's suddenly panicked one. Kendrick was sweating. A single bead rolled down his temple. He opened his mouth, but only a strangled noise came out. That single physiological sign of fear was more damning than any confession. Harrison slowly, deliberately capped his Mont Blanc pen. The click was like a gunshot in the silent alcove. He placed it neatly beside the unsigned contract. "Gentlemen," he said to his investors, his voice a chillingly calm sea after a storm. "It appears we need to pause for a moment to verify a technical query. My sincerest apologies for the interruption. Please enjoy a dessert on me." Robert. He snapped his gaze, locking onto his scientist. Stay here. He stood up, his tall frame commanding absolute authority. He looked at Bella. You. With me. Now. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and strode out of the alcove, expecting her to follow. Bella felt 100 pairs of eyes on her as she placed the water pitcher on a nearby service stand, her hands moving with an automated grace she didn't feel. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named Francois, was already power-walking towards her, his face a thundercloud. Rossi. What in God's name do you think you're doing? He hissed. Before she could answer, Harrison Sterling's voice cut across the dining room. He had stopped at the entrance, turning back. He didn't shout, but his voice carried an unmistakable weight that silenced the entire restaurant. She's with me, Francois, he said, using the manager's name with a familiarity that was both a shock and a threat. Add any damages to my bill. Francois froze mid-stride, his mouth agape. Bella straightened her apron, took a deep breath, and walked away from her table, away from her job, away from the life she had been hiding in. She walked past the gawking diners and the stunned staff, her head held high, and followed the billionaire out into the cool New York night, leaving $100 million deal and the ruins of her quiet life in her wake. The gilded cage was behind her, but she had no idea what lay ahead. The ride in Harrison Sterling's Maybach was a silent, tension-filled journey through the neon-streaked canyons of Manhattan. The car's interior was a cocoon of silent, opulent leather, a world away from the clatter of the restaurant kitchen. Bella sat opposite him, her hands folded in her lap, the simple black fabric of her uniform seeming out of place against the plush cream upholstery. She could feel his eyes on her, analytical and piercing, as if he were trying to deconstruct her into her base components. He didn't speak until they were ascending in a private high-speed elevator in a sleek glass tower in the financial district. The building was home to the global headquarters of Sterling Dynamics. What's your name? He asked, his voice flat. Isabella Rossi. And you're a waitress. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact that he was trying to reconcile with the impossible event that had just occurred. For the past 5 years, yes. And before that. The elevator doors opened into a sprawling, minimalist office. It was more like an art gallery than a workspace with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike view of the city. A single massive desk made of polished obsidian stood in the center. Bella hesitated, the ghosts of her past swirling around her. Before that, I was a doctoral candidate in computational chemistry at Caltech. Harrison stopped and turned to face her fully. A flicker of understanding crossed his features. Caltech. Who was your advisor, Dr. Marcus Albright? The name landed with a quiet thud. Harrison knew him. Albright was a star in the academic world, frequently collaborating with private industry. I've read his work, Harrison said slowly, including his 2019 paper on proton transfer catalysis, the one he co-authored with a postdoc, Robert Kendrick. Bella's silence was her confirmation. The air crackled with unspoken implications. That paper, Harrison continued, his voice dangerously soft, was the theoretical foundation for our entire green hydrogen project. It's what I invested $80 million of R&D into, and it was based on a flawed premise, Bella said, her voice finally finding its strength. A flaw I found and reported to Albright a week before he published. He stole my thesis, removed my name, and published it with Kendrick. Harrison stared at her, his mind racing, piecing together the ugly puzzle. The ambitious professor, the eager postdoc, the brilliant but naive graduate student. It was a story as old as academia itself. "Why didn't you fight it?" he asked, his tone less an accusation and more a genuine inquiry, with what Bella's laugh was brittle. "I was a 24-year-old student with $50,000 in debt. He was a tenured department head with the full backing of the university. Their lawyers would have buried me. So I did the only thing I could. I disappeared." He led her to a conference room adjacent to his office. With a tap on a glass wall, it frosted over, becoming opaque. He gestured for her to sit at the long, empty table. He remained standing, pacing like a cuttled panther. "Tonight at that table, I was about to commit $100 million from my investors and leverage the future of my company on that formula," he said, thinking aloud. "If you are right, you didn't just save me from a bad investment. You saved my entire company from catastrophic failure and public disgrace. If you are wrong, you're a lunatic who just cost me the biggest deal of my life for nothing." He stopped pacing and leaned on the table, his hands flat, his face close to hers. "So Isabella Rossi, former Caltech prodigy, I need to know. How certain are you?" 100%, she said, without a moment's hesitation. "The math doesn't lie. Dr. Kendrick's math is lying. Prove it." It was the ultimate challenge. For the next hour, Harrison Sterling grilled her. He wasn't just a businessman. His own background was in physics and engineering. He threw complex questions at her, citing obscure principles of quantum electrodynamics and materials science. He was testing her, pushing her, trying to find a crack in her knowledge. He found none. Bella, freed from the constraints of her waitress persona, came alive. The years of repressed knowledge and passion flooded back. She talked about spin-orbit coupling, about relativistic quantum chemistry, about the limitations of the Born-Oppenheimer approximation in their specific context. She filled a whiteboard with equations, her handwriting swift and confident. The tired waitress was gone, replaced by a razor-sharp scientist. Harrison watched his initial skepticism melting away into a dawning sense of awe, which quickly curdled into a cold, hard fury, directed squarely at his head of R&D. As Bella finished deriving the corrected version of the pull function, Harrison's phone buzzed. It was a text from Mr. Davenport. "Harrison, what the hell is going on?" Kendrick just left the restaurant looking like he'd seen a ghost. "Tanaka is ready to walk," Harrison typed a quick reply. "Minor snag. Sit tight. I'll handle it." He looked up at Bella, a new expression on his face. It was one of calculated respect. "All right, Ms. Rossi," he said, his tone shifting from interrogator to commander. "You've convinced me there's a fire. Now I need you to help me find the arsonist. I'm giving you full access to our R&D servers. Everything. The raw data, the simulation logs, Kendrick's private project files. I want you to find me undeniable proof that he knew. I need the smoking gun." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "My company is now in your hands. Can you do it?" Bella looked at the complex equations on the whiteboard, her equations finally seeing the light of day. This was a chance not just for vindication, but for justice. A chance to reclaim the future that had been stolen from her. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing with a conviction she hadn't felt in 6 long years. "I can." The Sterling Dynamics R&D lab was a stark contrast to the opulent executive suite. It was a cathedral of science, a sprawling, sterile white space, humming with the quiet power of supercomputers, and filled with the blue glow of holographic displays. For Bella, stepping inside was like taking her first breath after years of drowning. The scent of ionized air and clean room solvents was a perfume she had forgotten she loved. Harrison led her to a restricted access terminal in a glass-walled office. This was Kendrick's primary workstation. He explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You'll have my personal override. Level 1 clearance. Nothing is hidden from you." He tapped his security card, and pressed his thumb to a biometric scanner. With a soft chime, the system unlocked. The screen flickered to life, displaying complex molecular models and reams of data. "My head of security, a man named Gavin, is a ghost in the system. He'll ensure Kendrick can't wipe anything remotely." "But Kendrick is smart. If he's hiding something, it'll be buried deep," Harrison said. "I have to go and placate my investors. I'm buying you time. Use it well." He left her alone. The silence of the lab settled around her, broken only by the whisper of the server fans. For a moment, the sheer scale of the task was paralyzing. She was sifting through a mountain of data equivalent to the entire Library of Congress, looking for a single deliberately hidden needle. But then the muscle memory of a researcher kicked in. She started not with Kendrick's conclusions, but with the raw, unprocessed sensor data from the experimental catalytic reactor. This was where the truth lived, before it could be manipulated or massaged to fit a desired outcome. The hours bled into one another. Bella forgot she was a waitress in a cheap, worn-out uniform. She was a scientist on the hunt. She compiled terabytes of data, her fingers flying across the holographic keyboard, her mind navigating complex data structures with an agility she thought she'd lost. She found the first discrepancy at 3:17 a.m. It was in the logs for a simulation run from 6 months prior. The official report signed by Kendrick showed a perfect, stable energy output. But Bella, digging into the machine-level logs, found the original unaltered data stream. For a nanosecond at peak pressure, the simulation had recorded an anomalous energy spike, a massive, uncontrolled release of gamma radiation. It was exactly what her corrected formula predicted. "Got you," she whispered to the empty room. The simulation hadn't crashed. A sophisticated subroutine had kicked in, isolating the anomaly and flagging it as a sensor error before continuing the test under modified parameters. The final report was a lie constructed from the falsified data. Someone had programmed the system to ignore reality. Bella dug deeper, looking for the origin of that subroutine. It was a masterful piece of code designed to be almost invisible. But its digital signature was unique. She cross-referenced it across the entire network. And then she found it again. And again. Dozens of simulations, all with the same hidden flaw, the same automatic data scrub. Kendrick hadn't made a mistake. He had systematically and deliberately concealed the instability of the catalyst for over a year. As dawn approached, casting a pale grey light over the city, Bella found the next piece of the puzzle. It was a folder hidden within the operating system's kernel files, a place no one would ever think to look. The folder was named M.A. Contingency. M.A. Marcus Albright, her former professor. Her blood ran cold. The folder was protected by a layer of powerful AES-256 encryption. It was a digital vault. Without the key, it was impenetrable. Bella's mind raced. What would the key be? A password? A phrase? Something personal to Kendrick and Albright. She thought back to her time in the lab, to the arrogant pronouncements of her professor. Albright had been obsessed with the greats of physics. He often quoted one in particular when talking about discovery. Raffiniert ist der Herrgott, aber boshaft ist nicht. Subtle is the Lord, but malicious he is not. Einstein's famous declaration of faith in a rational universe. Albright loved to say it. With trembling fingers, Bella typed the German phrase into the decryption prompt. She hit enter. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then the screen flashed, decryption successful. The folder opened. It contained only 2 files. The first was a financial ledger. It detailed a series of untraceable cryptocurrency payments from a holding company in the Cayman Islands to an account linked to Dr. Robert Kendrick. The total came to $5 million. The name of the holding company was a simple, chilling anagram, Omnigen, Richard Hayes's company, Sterling's biggest rival. The second file was a short audio recording. Bella clicked on it. The voice that filled the silent office was unmistakable. It was Dr. Kendrick speaking to Richard Hayes. "The deal is set for tomorrow night," Kendrick's voice said, tinny and conspiratorial. "Sterling will sign. The investors will be locked in. Once they break ground on the first plant in Arizona, we give the data to our contact at the EPA. The anonymous tip. We show them the instability. Sterling Dynamics will be buried in lawsuits and regulatory hell. The stock will collapse. You'll be able to acquire their entire patent portfolio, including the real stable formula for pennies on the dollar." There was a pause, then Richard Hayes's smooth, predatory voice. "And the stable formula. You're sure you have it?" "Of course," Kendrick replied, and the next words hit Bella like a physical blow. Albright's little protege figured it out years ago, just before he pushed her out. He's been sitting on it ever since. The corrected pool function. It's a work of art. The key was adjusting the sigma value for relativistic effects. A small change, but it makes all the difference. Bella sank back into the chair, her breath knocked out of her. It was all there. The sabotage, the corporate espionage, the theft of her work, not once but twice. Kendrick wasn't just hiding a flaw. He was planning to sell the cure to the highest bidder after the company he worked for was a smoking crater. She saved the audio file and the ledger to a secure external drive. She had her smoking gun. In fact, she had an entire arsenal. Just as she was about to call Harrison, an alert flashed in the corner of her screen. "Security warning, unauthorized Level 1 access detected. Sector 7G. Someone else was in the system with the same clearance level as her. She checked the access logs. The credentials weren't Harrison's. They were Kendrick's. But he was supposed to be locked out. Then she saw it. A remote deletion command was being executed, targeting the kernel directory where she'd found the encrypted folder. He was trying to cover his tracks. Gavin Harrison's security chief would stop him, but it would take a few seconds. In those seconds, the original files could be wiped forever. Bella didn't hesitate. She initiated a system-wide lockdown command, using Harrison's override to shut down all network access to the R&D servers. Her own terminal would be cut off as well, but it would be too late for Kendrick. A new warning flashed on her screen, this one more urgent. Physical breach alert, restricted lab, level 3. Proximity sensor triggered. Someone was in the building. Someone was coming. And she was locked in the lab with the only existing copy of the evidence that could destroy them. The quiet hum of the servers was suddenly replaced by a much more menacing sound, the heavy metallic thump of a magnetic lock engaging. Bella was sealed inside the lab. The lockdown command had worked, but it had also turned her sanctuary into a trap. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. Kendrick wasn't just trying to delete files from home. He was here. He must have used a physical keycard or an old passcode that Gavin's digital sweep had missed. He was coming to destroy the evidence at its source. She looked around the sterile room. There were no weapons, no hiding places, just glass walls and glowing machines. The main door to the lab was a thick slab of reinforced steel. She watched the small security panel next to it. A red light blinked ominously. Access denied. System lockdown. She heard a muffled shout of frustration from the hallway, followed by a series of frantic beeps as Kendrick tried his keycard again and again. He was locked out. But for how long a man desperate enough to commit industrial sabotage on this scale wouldn't be stopped by a locked door? Bella's mind, trained to find solutions in complex systems, went into overdrive. She had the evidence on the thumb drive in her pocket. The original files were safe on the isolated server, but if Kendrick got to the terminal, he could physically destroy the machine. She needed to get out. She raced back to the workstation. The lockdown had severed her connection to the outside world. No phone, no internet. But she still had control of the lab's internal network. She pulled up the building schematics. The lab was part of a larger research wing, a labyrinth of clean rooms, server farms, and testing chambers. The lockdown had sealed the entire wing, but there might be another way out. Her eyes scanned the blueprints. A service corridor. A maintenance hatch designed for coolant pipe access. It was small, but it led into the building's ventilation system. It was a crazy movie plot idea, but it was the only one she had. From the hallway came a new sound, a high-pitched whirring noise. A drill. He was trying to bypass the electronic lock. She was running out of time. She located the maintenance hatch behind a large server rack. It was secured with 4 heavy bolts. Using a heavy metal stool as a wrench, she threw all her weight into turning them. Her muscles, accustomed to carrying trays and not turning industrial bolts, screamed in protest. One by one, with a groan of stressed metal, they gave way. She pulled the heavy panel open, revealing a dark, dusty shaft just big enough for a person to crawl through. Cool, recycled air washed over her face. She hesitated for a second, then hoisted herself inside, pulling the heavy panel closed behind her. Total darkness. The air was cold and smelled of dust and machine oil. She was in the guts of the skyscraper. Using the light from her phone, which had no signal but still worked as a flashlight, she began to crawl. The sounds of Kendrick's drill faded behind her, replaced by the deep, rhythmic hum of the building's life support. The schematics she had memorized were her only guide. Left at the first junction, then right past a massive air circulation fan that churned the air with terrifying force. It was a claustrophobic nightmare, but the drive in her pocket felt like a talisman pushing her forward. She was aiming for a vertical shaft that she hoped would lead down to the lower, non-secured floors. As she crawled, her mind kept replaying the audio file. Albright's little protégé figured it out years ago. The casual, dismissive cruelty of it fueled her resolve. This wasn't just about Harrison Sterling's company anymore. It was about reclaiming her own name. Suddenly, her phone screen went black. The battery was dead. The darkness was absolute. The humming of the fans seemed to grow louder, more menacing. Panic, cold and suffocating, began to close in. She was lost, blind, in a metal maze 60 stories above the ground. She fought it down, forcing herself to breathe slowly. She could still feel the flow of air. The schematics were burned into her brain. She kept crawling, navigating by touch and memory. After what felt like an eternity, her hand touched a different texture. A ladder. The vertical shaft. Relief washed over her so intensely her knees went weak. She began to climb down, her hands and knees scraped raw by the rough metal. She descended 2 floors before her foot hit a solid surface. Another access panel. She pushed. It swung open with a rusty creak, flooding her eyes with the dim artificial light of a deserted office floor. She tumbled out, covered in dust and grease, her waitress uniform torn and stained. The floor was empty, a sea of dark cubicles. It was a sales department, an entirely different section of the building. She had made it out of the lockdown zone. She ran for the emergency stairwell, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. She burst through the door and didn't stop running, taking the stairs 2 at a time, descending floor after floor. As she reached the ground-level lobby, she saw them. Harrison Sterling, flanked by 2 formidable-looking security guards, was arguing with the night shift staff. He looked frantic, his usual composure completely gone. "Miss Rosie Isabella!" He shouted, his voice filled with a mixture of raw panic and immense relief as he saw her emerge from the stairwell. She stumbled towards him, exhausted but triumphant, and held up the small black thumb drive. "I have it, Mr. Sterling," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "I have everything." Just as he took the drive from her hand, the lobby elevator chimed. The doors slid open. Standing inside was Dr. Robert Kendrick. His face was pale, his suit disheveled, and his hands were covered in grease. In one hand he clutched a portable drill. His eyes widened in shock as he saw Bella standing with Harrison. He looked from her to the drive in Harrison's hand, and back to her face. In that single silent moment, he knew he was finished. His desperate gamble had failed. He made a sound, a choked, guttural cry of despair, and lunged. Not for Harrison or the drive, but for Bella. It was a purely instinctual, hateful act, an attempt to destroy the person who had brought his world crashing down. But he never reached her. Harrison's security guards moved with startling speed, intercepting him in a blur of motion. They tackled him to the marble floor with a sickening thud. The drill clattered away across the polished surface. The great Dr. Robert Kendrick, the man who had almost duped the world, was reduced to a writhing, defeated figure on the lobby floor of the company he had tried to destroy. Harrison ignored the commotion. He looked at Bella, at her torn clothes, and the exhaustion etched on her face. He saw not a waitress, but a warrior. "Let's go finish this," he said, his voice quiet, but filled with the promise of a reckoning. The emergency board meeting was convened in the main conference room on the 60th floor, the very room Bella had been in just hours before. The sun was now fully up, casting long, dramatic shadows across the city. The mood, however, was dark and stormy. Mr. Davenport and Kenji Tanaka sat at the long obsidian table, their faces grim. They had been summoned by Harrison in the pre-dawn hours with a message that was both cryptic and alarming. They looked exhausted, confused, and deeply skeptical. $100 million deal didn't get paused by a waitress without serious consequences. Bella sat beside Harrison at the head of the table. She had been given a chance to clean up in a private washroom, but she had refused to change out of her torn and grimy waitress uniform. It was a statement. It was who she was when this began, and she would wear it as a badge of honor at the end. The door opened, and 2 of Harrison's security guards escorted a pale, haggard-looking Dr. Kendrick into the room. His wrists were in silver handcuffs. They sat him down at the far end of the table, opposite Harrison. The silence was heavy enough to bend steel. "Gentlemen." Harrison began, his voice cold and precise. "I apologize for the dramatics of the past few hours. When we last spoke, a serious allegation was made against the integrity of our project. I felt it was my duty to investigate it thoroughly before proceeding." He nodded towards Bella. "This is Isabella Rossi. She is the individual who brought this matter to my attention. She is also, as it turns out, the true architect of the foundational theory our entire project is based upon." Davenport and Tanaka stared at Bella, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and dawning curiosity. "That's preposterous," Kendrick spat from the end of the table, his voice cracking. "She's a nobody, a disgruntled, failed student trying to blackmail her way into a fortune." Harrison ignored him. He slid a tablet to the center of the table. "Robert, you're right about one thing. Ms. Rossi is a brilliant scientist. So brilliant, in fact, that she not only identified the flaw in your formula, she also found where you buried the evidence of your fraud." He tapped the tablet. A file directory appeared on the large screen at the end of the room. It showed the contents of the MA contingency folder. As you can see, Harrison continued, his voice dripping with ice. Dr. Kendrick was not merely incompetent. He was malicious. He knew the catalyst was unstable. He systematically programmed our simulation software to fake the results and hide the danger. He played the audio file. Kendrick's conspiratorial voice filled the conference room, laying out the entire plot to bankrupt Sterling Dynamics and sell the corrected formula to Omnigen. When Richard Hayes's voice came on, Kenji Tanaka let out a sharp, angry hiss. Omnigen had been a thorn in his own firm's side for years. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. Kendrick had shrunk in his chair, his face ashen. Mr. Davenport looked like he had been punched in the gut. "The $5 million in cryptocurrency has already been traced," Harrison said calmly. Half went to Kendrick. The other half went to his accomplice, Dr. Marcus Albright at Caltech, who provided him with the corrected formula, Miss Rossi's corrected formula, which they planned to sell after my company was in ruins. Kendrick finally broke. "He made me do it," he shrieked, pointing a trembling, cuffed hand towards the speaker from which his own voice had come. "Hayes." He approached me. He knew about the flaw. Albright told him. They said Sterling was a fool and I was wasting my talent. They offered me everything." His voice trailed off into a pathetic sob. "Harrison." Sterling rose to his feet, his towering frame radiating a cold, righteous fury. "You didn't just try to defraud my investors and me," he said, his voice low and menacing as he walked toward Kendrick. "You were willing to build a facility that could have exploded. You were willing to let people die to cover your tracks and cash in. The only reason that isn't happening is because of her." He gestured to Bella. "Because a woman you and Albright dismissed and tried to erase had more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire body. She was working for minimum wage, cleaning up after people like you. Yet she had the courage to speak up to prevent a catastrophe while you were counting your blood money." He stopped directly in front of Kendrick. "You're not just fired, Robert. I'm going to personally fund the federal investigation into you, into Albright, and into Richard Hayes. I will spend whatever it takes to ensure that you all spend the rest of your miserable lives in prison cells. Get him out of my sight." The guards hauled the weeping Kendrick to his feet and dragged him from the room. Harrison walked back to the head of the table. He looked at Davenport and Tanaka, whose expressions had transformed from skepticism to horrified respect. "Gentlemen," he said, his tone shifting back to business, "the Sterling Kendrick catalyst is dead. However," he looked at Bella, a genuine admiring smile touching his lips for the first time. "The Rossi catalyst is very much alive, Ms. Rossi has provided me with her corrected formula. It's not just stable. It's 20% more efficient than even Kendrick's faked data predicted. We are not back at square one. We are a light year ahead of where we thought we were." He picked up the contract portfolio that had been sitting on the table since the night before. With a decisive rip, he tore the signature page in half. He then turned to his laptop, typed for a moment, and a new document projected onto the screen. It was a new partnership agreement. "This is a new deal," Harrison announced. "Sterling Dynamics is forming a new subsidiary to oversee this technology. It will be called Rossi Sterling Innovations. Ms. Rossi will be appointed its Chief Technology Officer with a 25% equity stake and full creative control over the research. That is my non-negotiable term." "Are we still in business?" Mr. Davenport and Kenji Tanaka looked at each other. They looked at the new projections on the screen. Then they looked at Bella, the quiet waitress in a torn uniform, who now held the keys to the future of green energy. Davenport broke into a wide grin. "Mr. Sterling," he said, extending a hand, not to Harrison, but across the table to Bella. "It would be an honor to invest in Ms. Rossi's company." 6 months later, Isabella Rossi stood in a lab that made the one at Sterling Dynamics look like a high school chemistry classroom. The Rossi Sterling Innovation Center was a testament to what could be achieved when brilliance was given the resources it deserved. Sunlight streamed through vast 3-story windows, glinting off state-of-the-art equipment that Bella herself had hand-picked. She wore a crisp white lab coat over a simple but elegant dress. The black waitress uniform was a distant memory, a skin she had shed. Her team of 20 elite scientists, whom she had hired from the best universities in the world, worked diligently around her, their faces alight with the passion of discovery. The centerpiece of the lab was a gleaming pilot-scale catalytic reactor. Today was its first full-power activation. Harrison Sterling stood beside her, his usual bespoke suit replaced by a lab coat identical to hers. The investors Davenport and Tanaka watched from a safe glass-enclosed observation deck, their faces beaming. Ready CTO Rossi Harrison asked a playful but respectful tone in his voice. They had become partners in the truest sense of the word, their relationship built on a foundation of mutual admiration and a shared vision. "Ready, CEO Sterling," she replied with a confident smile. She initiated the startup sequence. On a massive monitor, data began to stream in. Pressure, temperature, energy input. And finally, the catalytic efficiency rating. The numbers climbed steadily, surpassing the old flawed projections, surpassing even her own corrected estimates. It settled at a number that made the whole room gasp. 78% efficiency. Harrison breathed his eyes wide. "Bella, that's impossible. The math doesn't lie," she said, softly echoing her own words from that fateful night. A round of applause erupted from the observation deck. Bella felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. It was more than just success. It was a restoration. Later that day, she sat in her spacious, sunlit office, the one that had replaced Harrison's imposing obsidian suite. A framed napkin hung on her wall, not the original from Aurelia, but a new one. On it, in her own handwriting, was the correct formula, the Rossi equation. The small subscript R for Rossi and the REL for the relativistic correction were a quiet testament to her victory. Her personal phone buzzed. It was a picture from her mother, who was on a cruise in the Mediterranean. Her medical bills paid off her health better than it had been in years. "Thinking of you, my brilliant daughter," the message read. There was a knock on her door. It was Harrison. "I have some news you might find interesting," he said, holding out a tablet. The headline was from a major financial journal. Omnigen CEO Richard Hayes indicted in corporate espionage scandal. Former Professor Albright and scientist Kendrick to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. Justice. It wasn't just an abstract concept. It was real, and it was deeply satisfying. They deserved it, Bella said simply. They did. Harrison agreed. He looked around her office at the woman she had become, or rather the woman she had been all along. It's funny, he mused. I went to that dinner to sign a $100 million deal. I thought I was buying a formula. But it turns out I found something infinitely more valuable. And what's that? Bella asked, a curious smile playing on her lips. The person who wrote it, he said. I just had to look past the uniform to see her. Bella looked out the window at the city skyline, no longer a barrier of unattainable lights, but a landscape of possibility. Her past was not an anchor, but a foundation. She had walked through the fire of betrayal and emerged not burned, but forged. She was Isabella Rossi, and she was finally, truly home. In the end, it wasn't about the money or the fame. It was about integrity. Isabella Rossi's story reminds us that our circumstances don't define our worth. The world may see a waitress, a cashier, a janitor, but inside each of us can be a mind capable of changing the world. It's a powerful lesson in courage, the courage to speak truth to power, even when your voice is shaking. Harrison Sterling thought he had all the answers, but the most important truth came from the one person in the room everyone else had been trained to ignore. What hidden talents and forgotten dreams are lying dormant inside you, just waiting for the right moment to speak up? If this story inspired you or made you think, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to share it with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters. For more stories about the hidden heroes and incredible twists of fate that shape our world, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next.